And what does that mean, being beyond the world in many ways?
It means seeing the world, if you like, on one level, seeing the physicality, seeing the familiar world, the conceptual world, seeing it for what it is, because it's not exactly as it appears in many ways. It's not a conceptual framework. Once, I think this is where the psychedelics did actually really bring a lot to the realization of reality for people that use them in certain ways, which is reality is transparent. Things are transparent. It is our conceptual framework that makes them seem solid.
So it's the way that when you say conceptual framework, that's the way we're conditioned to see things.
Exactly. And more, the reality seems to shimmer with transparency. And again, I don't sit in that state all the time. I get identified with my personality. I get hooked by reactivity. But most of the time, there's a little shift of view to see the transparency of it all, the emptiness, if you like, of it all.
And why do you get hooked sometimes?
It's a great question. Again, it's a question of identity. I'm taking myself to be a part of my history. I'll be taking myself to be a young boy, for instance, who maybe doesn't feel he can cope. Or usually that kind of hook it goes way, way back.
So it's deep conditioning.
Deep conditioning. The fact that we perceive the other as another is part of the soul being in a body, and because originally when we come in with our mom, as far as they can make out, the baby cannot tell that he's separate from his mother.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
The conditioned process and the laws of physics and whatever that go into it, the baby starts to feel like, oh, hello, someone's over there and I'm over here. That's the beginning of duality. Mm. So conditioning goes all the way back to the beginning. And identity goes all the way back there with it.
We were just chatting before we started recording, and we discovered we were the same Enneagram type. And
yeah.
And of course, we just done an interview with Sandra Maitre talking about the Enneagram. And just for people that haven't seen that, the Enneagram is basically the theory that there's 9 different basic personality types, and they operate in certain ways. And we're not all just one type, but we have one basic type. And ours is very much on the basic level, what's called the level of passions, a fear-orientated personality, and the potential. These are my words. The potential of that character, if you like, is to transform into the virtue of courage. And I wondered how that has happened during your journey with the Ridhwan school, and do you feel you're encouraged most of the time now in terms of when what was potentially a fearful situation for you arises? Is that an unfair question?
Well, no, I don't think it is an unfair question. I'm not thrilled with the word courage in the way it's maybe normally used, but I would say that, of course, I still experience fear when I'm hooked. It's one of the passions that will arise, probably continue to arise until complete enlightenment. But there's certainly, it's interesting, it doesn't feel so much like courage as like just a sense of confidence and ground. That there's something so solid, so fundamental, that is me, that is around me, that is everywhere, really, that enables, I guess maybe that is what gives the courage from the perspective of the virtue. I'm not really sure. But what I do know is that having seen more of the way reality is, I'm far more prepared to meet its challenges.
Because the picture's wider, the ground is somehow stronger for you. So I guess there's more. You feel there's more support. There's more.
Yes, there's definitely more support. There's, I would say, from the perspective of the six, the Enneagram, there's a loving holding that seems to be there a lot of the time. And it's not just, it's boundless, it's everywhere. It's not just me, not just in me.
So, you mentioned enlightenment, which I hadn't mentioned before, and I was interested what you perceive as enlightenment these days. I guess in the early days of the experiences when you were much younger, and especially when you were with Osho, Bhagwan, Rajneesh, whatever we call him these days, Osho it should be, then there was kind of, you had an image of what enlightenment is, and something you said earlier before we went on camera again was that realization didn't come close to what I imagined. So you possibly imagined something dramatic, or
yes, yeah, I did, and partly because right. I mean, what I imagined was there's going to be this moment where everything would sort of lighten up, and I would have no fear ever again, because I think really the passion of fear was part of my journey all the way through, still is. So there was this idea that I would be in this boundless state, blissful state, transcended above all humanity, or I wasn't really sure what it was, but it looked very much like what Osho kind of presented and manifested. And I had all kinds of ideas about it. Certainly that it was going to be a moment in time. That was definitely one of the ideas I had. Turns out it's not like that. And what I call realization is, first of all, I recognize it's my realization. To talk about realization as a sort of generic state, it no longer makes a lot of sense to me. Because it is seen through the lens of my individual consciousness that is different than yours. The consciousness is basically made up of the same stuff, but we have individual consciousnesses, it seems, that experience realizations of whatever degree uniquely.
And there's going to be on top of that consciousness and personality as well, which is going to, whatever happens has to filter through.
Exactly. So it's each individual consciousness is going to get conditioned in the way that it does, and it's going to have its realizations kind of filtered through that. Yeah, exactly, you said, yeah. So it's far more subtle than I imagined it was going to be. I no longer really sort of go with the idea of enlightenment as a generic state. And it's freer.